Hi Year 12, it was really lovely to see so many of you in school last week. As I mentioned last week, we're going to try really hard to get through the final 3 poems before the summer holidays so that I can then set a talk through knowledge organiser to help you to recap all of the poems before we meet back in college in September. So today's focus poem is The Love Poem by Carol Ann Duffy. It can be found on page 34 of your anthologies. So first and foremost, you might just want to locate the poem because that's where you'll be making the majority of your notes. Carol Ann Duffy, I'll go through a bit more context to do with her, but she is still writing now. She was born in 1955. And this poem would have been written in the early 2000s, I imagine. I haven't got an exact date in front of me. Okay, so as your daily review today, what I want you to do is start to think about the poems as a whole, because in your exam you're going to be given a theme and you're going to have to link the awakening to the poems based on that theme. So it's a good idea to keep thinking about the poems thematically and grouping them in that way so that you're well equipped to go into the exam and know what poems you might be likely to choose for different themes. So I've written some of the themes that we've covered on the screen there for you. I would like you just to decide which poems from your anthology fit these themes. And again, it might be that one poem fits more than one theme. That's fine to write it down more than once. Okay, pause the video here and see if you can sort the poems out into themes. Off you go. Okay then, so a bit of context, a bit of information about Carol Ann Duffy. Dame Carol Ann Duffy is a Scottish poet and she was appointed Britain's Poet Laureate in May 2009. And she was the first woman, the first Scot and the first openly LGBT person to hold the position. Lots of her poems deal with different themes and ideas such as feminism, such as oppression, etc. So we'll read the poem first and foremost. I'm going to read it through once and then I suggest that you pause the video and read through on your own. The Love Poem. Till love exhausts itself, longs for the sleep of words, my mistress's eyes, to lie on a white sheet at rest in the language, let me count the ways, or shrink to a phrase like an epitaph, come live with me, or fall from its own high cloud of syllables in a pool of verse, 1 hour with thee, till love gives in and speaks in the whisper of art, dear heart, how like you this? Love's lips pursed to quotation marks, kissing a line. Look in thy heart and write. Love's light fading, darkening, black as ink on a page. There is a garden in her face. Till love is all in the mind. Oh, my America, my new-found land. Or all in the pen, in the writer's hand. Behold, thou art fair, not there except in a poem, known by heart like a prayer. Both near and far, the desire of the moth for the star. Pause the video and read through the poem on your own. Off you go. Okay, so now you've had a chance to have a look at the poem, I would just like you to note down, perhaps on a separate piece of paper, your initial thoughts. Do you think this shows an optimistic or a pessimistic attitude towards love? And were any of the lines that we've been through familiar to you at all? Have you heard them anywhere before? Because we've talked about this idea of intertextuality, of linking multiple texts. So just pause the video here and jot down your thoughts to those 2 questions. So it might well be that some of these lines were familiar to you. So the lines that I've put on the screen can all be located within the poem. I've seen them described almost as a greatest hits of love poetry through the ages. And there's certainly some writers that you'll recognise there. So these lines that Duffy separates with a hyphen are lines from very famous, seminal, so well-known love poems throughout the ages. You've got Shakespeare, My Mistress's Eyes. That particular sonnet is about how Shakespeare felt that his love was completely unique and rare to find. Okay, you've got all sorts of different ones. One that I do want to draw your attention to is Oh My America, My Newfound Land. I'm hoping that that at least rings some bells with those of you who were in school last week, because that comes from John Donne's poem To His Mistress Going to Bed that we looked at last lesson. And it's also quoted in the poem To John Donne. Okay, so what I would like you to do is just to locate these lines. It perhaps might be nice to highlight them if you're using highlighters, or underline them in a different colour, just to really clearly show you that they are quotations from various love poems over time. And I'd like you to have a think about why Duffy might have done that. Why do you think she's included different love poems over time? So then, in writing her poem, she shows that she shows an awareness, of the tradition of the love poem. So she knows that there have been writers trying to write poetry about love since the beginning of literature. And she explores how that idea makes it actually quite difficult to write a unique love poem, write a poem like no one has ever written one before. So everyone thinks that their love is unique, and we've explored that idea through different poems as well, like Aqua Bon Dire. And Shakespeare certainly asserts that his love is unique. But Duffy explores how it actually becomes really difficult to celebrate that love in words. And as Derrida, who is a post-structuralist, points out, even the words I love you are always a quotation. So someone has always said those words before. And that perhaps accounts for the title of the poem, and that's why the title of the poem is interesting, because it's entirely seemingly unimaginative. The Love Poem. And I'd like you to make some notes to that effect, that the reason that Duffy has named this The Love Poem is because she struggles to find unique ways to record the love that she's experienced. Now, this also adds to my earlier question about whether the poem presents an optimistic or pessimistic view of love. Because if you scan the poem and you see these lines, and these are what stands out to you, then these lines convey a real sense of optimism. Let me count the ways, come live with me, 1 hour with thee, dear heart, how like you this? They all show a real optimism, a real passion, and a real and true love. But if we're to take those words out, if we're to take our Poets of the Past words out of the poem and just read Duffy's own words, let's have a look at what happens to the poem. Till love exhausts itself, longs for the sleep of words, to lie on a white sheet at rest in the language, or shrink to a phrase like an epitaph, or fall from its own high cloud of syllables in a pool of verse. Till love gives in and speaks in the whisper of art, love's lips pursed to quotation marks, kissing a line, love's light fading, darkening, black as ink on a page, till love is all in the mind, or all in the pen, in the writer's hand. Not there, except in a poem known by heart like a prayer, both near and far, near and far. So the optimism of the poet's lines certainly contrast with Duffy's own lines. So you've got the optimism shown and conveyed in those quotations from poets from the past, and that directly contrasts with Duffy's pessimistic language. So I would like you, just next to your poem, to copy out what I've written in blue there onto your anthologies, please. Okay, so through Duffy's own lines, she demonstrates that she is potentially writing about the end of a relationship. And we get that because there's a lot of references to death and decay in the poem. I'll point some out to you, and I'd like you also to identify them in your poem after I finish talking. So, to lie on a white sheet, at rest, conjures up images of a body in a morgue perhaps. Epitaph. An epitaph are words used in tribute to someone who has died. So that's an explicit reference to death there. Let's have a look what else we have. Love's light fading, the fading of the light. Oops, sorry, my line's gone wrong. Black as ink on a page. And even the suggestion of prayer to do with the religious connections to mourning a death as well. So we get the sense that the love that Duffy is trying to immortalise within the poem, to memorialise within the poem, has actually ended, and that potentially accounts for all of the references to death and decay as the poem goes on. Okay, so that was just a really brief overview of the poem. We will have a chance to revisit it at a later date, but as I said, I really want to get through all of them before the summer holidays so that you've at least encountered them. So, just to finish off today's lesson, what I would like you to do is to have a think about which themes you think could potentially link this poem to the awakening, and I'd like you to email me or message me through Show My Homework with your responses. So do you think this is a poem about marriage? Do you think you could link this poem to the awakening because of the theme of desire, enduring love, or love in society? Okay, and thank you very much for completing this and keeping up with all the work. It is really lovely to hear from you week on week and see how well you're doing.